When terror struck, when I, Rafael Guzmán, a tired taxi driver, picked up a woman in the rain, that single ride became the thread that unraveled the rest of my life. The title of how I tell it now is plain, because the thing that began it all is plain. When terror strikes, the taxi driver and his gypsy passenger. I say the title like that because it helps me fold the memory back into order. It keeps the shape of that night so I don't lose any piece of it. It was June of 1999. I drove taxi number 824, a yellow cab that had seen better days. The heater always failing and a crack in the dashboard where I kept change and a rosary someone had given me. Playa del Carmen was slick with rain, the kind of tropical downpour that comes in sheets and makes the streetlights look like distant stars through blur. I was finishing a late shift, midnight into the small hours, when she came out of the darkness, like she had stepped through the rain itself. She waited at an empty bus stop, her clothes wet, hair plastered to her cheeks, humming a tune I had never heard. She climbed in without looking for the meter. Her hands smelled of wet earth. In the back seat, she kept her eyes low, and she hummed as if warming up a voice before speaking. When I asked where she was going, she only shook her head and said, "Anywhere." Her voice had a gravel to it and an accent that didn't quite fit the neighborhood. It was the kind of sound that makes you listen closer, even when you are tired. We drove. The city was half slept. She never offered money when I stopped at the light. After a while, I asked again for the destination. She tapped the glass between us and, without turning, said, "You will have a great problem." Her words were simple, but there was weight behind them. She laughed, a small, sharp sound, then added, "But you will be tested for what you love most." I remember thinking then that she was trying to scare me, pulling a line from some theater. "You need to pay," I told her, more from habit than anger. She lifted her hand, and when I looked, I saw she wore a small silver chain with something hanging from it, something like a scapular, only smaller, worn smooth by fingers. She pressed it into my palm. The metal was cold and heavy. She smelled of rain and cloves. "Keep it," she said. "Wear it close to your heart." I tried to hand it back. I said the usual things. "I can't take this. You should pay the fare." She shook her head slowly. The rain made the world into a different map that night. It made people speak in strange ways. She grasped my hand, tighter than a stranger should, and looked right at me for the first time. Her eyes were dark and very steady. "A witch will come for you. She wants what you will not give." Then she said a name I would carry with me for years: Sarah. She refused to pay when we reached the corner by the market. She left in a hurry, as if she had somewhere else pressing her, and she left the amulet in my hand. I laughed it off in the moment. I leaned back in the seat and told myself stories. Old women, beggars, people with odd beliefs. But as I drove on, the weight of the silver against my palm felt less like metal and more like a promise. I closed my fist around it and put the chain under my shirt. I did what I thought every sensible man would do. I kept the charm and pretended none of it would matter. If you like true paranormal stories, give this video a like and subscribe for more. Just a small thing keeps me telling the truth of what happened. The weeks that followed were small, irritating things at first. I couldn't sleep through the night. I'd catch myself staring at the chain and imagining faces in every shadow. Sometimes on my route, I'd see her again, a shape at the edge of the market, a blurred figure between the palms. But each time when I slowed down, she wasn't there. Once, Don Marin, my neighbor, who knew more people than his job deserved, called to say he'd seen a big black bird in a tree by my house, the kind of bird that looked too big for its place. "It laughed," he told me, half proud to report it. "It laughed like a person." I told him he was making jokes. I told myself I did not believe in such things. But then the bird came. The first time I saw it clearly was one afternoon when I took the late shift so my wife, who was pregnant then, could sleep. The storm had passed. The sky was bruised blue. I was washing the back seat with a rag when the bird came and settled on the telephone line by our house. At first, it looked like a vulture, too large, feathers matted, a head like a gnarled root. Then my eyes caught its skin, where the feathers fell away, almost warty, with reddish blotches, and a beak split like a seam. It cocked its head and made a sound that wasn't quite a caw. It laughed. A laugh that cut through the air like someone tearing paper. I felt it in the chest. My wife was inside, and the house felt suddenly far away, like the world had folded and she was in a different room. The bird stared at me, and for the first time I heard words, as if someone had leaned across the street and threaded a voice through the feather. "I will take what is yours," it said. It didn't have joy in that voice. There was hunger there, and a promise. After that, the nights were small terrors and tired days. I would hear noises in the walls. I would wake to find the amulet moved slightly, as if someone had touched it in the dark. Pregnant women are sensitive to odd things. It is not just in stories. And my wife started having dreams that made her wake with tears on her face. We laughed sometimes at ourselves, like two sailors mocking the sea. Then a woman boarded my taxi who changed the line entirely. She was old, older than anyone I expected to see, and she smelled of sun-baked earth and bitter herbs. She said she was going to a small house in the outskirts, and when I drove her, she looked at me with something like hunger. I made the mistake of answering her scorn with a cheap joke about fortune tellers. She didn't laugh. Instead, she put her hand to the small cross at my collar and spit in her palm like it was a curse. "Pay with blood," she said to me. "Pay with a piece of what you keep close, and maybe then I leave your soul for a time." I don't know what I expected. A fight? The police? But the words sat like a rock in my belly. I said nothing then. Later, the taxi boss called me in for a scolding because I missed a late-night pickup. The boss said I had been reckless about my schedule and maybe was losing my head. He docked my pay for that week, and I went home with a hole where anger should have been. The old woman kept coming. Or maybe she came in more than one form. She followed the bird, or the bird followed her. Once she seemed to melt into something immense and took the shape of a monstrous bird high in a tree outside the hospital where my wife had gone to check on our baby. The bird, or the witch, would lean to the window and laugh at the light. Its tongue was long enough to reach where a baby sleeps. The day our son was born, the house filled with a kind of light that made the pain of the week feel like a bad dream. We named him Jose Antonio. I remember holding him and feeling weight in my arms like the whole world had been placed on me at once. His skin smelled like milk and newness. My wife cried. The room was small and the nurses moved with efficient kindness. When I held him, I promised myself things I had never said out loud. I would work more. I would pray more. I would never leave him alone at night. But the protection we built was patchwork. We had the amulet. Don Marine took to leaving a bowl of salt by the door one night, a little ritual he said his grandmother had done. The priest agreed to perform a quick blessing. Not an incantation, just a church rite, nothing more than a way to call on something that had kept other people, perhaps, afloat. The curandero in the next town, a man who smelled of smoke and herbs, talked to my wife softly and touched her forehead. He did not promise miracles. He only said he would try what he could. We did what we could. We wrapped Jose in layers. We moved the crib to our room. I started working during the day and sleeping at night so I could be there every minute. A father is not always brave when his child is small. Fear becomes its own fuel. I learned to watch every sound in the house with a hawk's patience. I learned to jump at the creak of a floorboard and to count the seconds between the baby's breath and the world. Sometimes my hands shook from lack of sleep and the hum of the city outside. But there was a kind of sacredness in those first months. I would sit, half asleep, and look at Jose and think the world alone was worth everything I'd ever lost. The attacks escalated. The bird returned more frequently. It would perch on the phone line at night and make that same hard laugh. Once, it dove so close to the window that it shook the panes and left a smear of something dark on the glass. Neighbors started to whisper. Some thought I should leave. Others said curses could be broken by more prayers. We tried all those things. We sprinkled a little holy water once, no more detail than that, and I kept the amulet against my chest like an act of stubborn love. One night I fought sleep and kept the monitor on in the living room. I had the gun, an old pistol, small and ugly, something my father left behind that I had taken from the box in the closet. I hated it and I loved it. It sat usually under my pillow, wrapped in a shirt. I never thought I would use it. I carried it as one carries a last resort, a piece of metal shaped by panic. I never wanted to pull it out. I never wanted to be the man who leveled a weapon at a creature of the world. But a father's fear makes different rules. That night I woke to a sound like a window scraping. The monitor showed a shadow. I ran to the baby's room, and the crib was empty. The blanket lay twisted like a flower, and Jose, my small son who had filled the house with a fragile, stubborn light, was gone. The floor had a small smear of blood near the mattress, a thin line like a small river. I have tried always to keep from describing the things that make the stomach turn, but I will tell you this because it is the truth. There was a wound around his navel, small and bleeding, and his tiny body was limp and cold in the way that grief teaches you what words cannot hold. My voice left me in that moment. I ran through the house screaming for the name of God and the name of the woman in the rain and the name of every person who could help. My wife was awake by then, a tremor in her body like a bird that can't land. Don Marin was at the door with a light, and in the street neighbors gathered. The bird, if it was a bird, flew from the telephone line and disappeared into the sky. I don't remember how I found direction in that chaos. Some instinct, older than reason, takes hold in a father then. I saw a shadow by the alley and followed it. I heard a sound like someone carrying away a child, and before I knew it, I had the pistol in my hand. I walked because there was no plan but movement. There was no map but the need to find him. I found her on the other side of an abandoned lot, hunched over like a woman hiding. She looked at me with eyes that had lived many winters and knew how to make a body look smaller. In a hand, she held Jose like a rag. The baby was pale and quiet, and when he moved, the sound was small and heartbreaking. The witch, if I can call her that, turned and hissed as if insulted I had reached her. She was a shell of an old woman, and then something else at the same time. The air around her smelled of rust and sweet incense. There was no time for a sermon. I remember raising the gun like someone raising a weight warmer than iron. I shouted, and something in me broke open. "Leave him!" I shouted. "Leave my son!" She laughed. It was a sound that pulled at the inside of my mouth. Soldiers of the mind have names for these things. I had none then. I only had the feel of the gun in my hand and the sound of my heart in my ears. There is a moment between intent and action that lasts forever in memory. I pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the night. The old woman stumbled, and though she screamed, it was not a satisfaction to hear. She fell back against a wall, and her eyes rolled. She bled, and she bled in a way that said this had been a body like any other. I remember the look on José's face as I scooped him up, his small chest heaving, and there was a sound the way a kettle makes when it finally moves steam. The neighbors came running, the police arrived, and the confusion folded into a long night of questions and sirens. Later, in the light of morning, they found a woman nearby who matched my description. She had been shot at close range. There were holes in her coat. They said she was dead. I do not remember being satisfied by death. I remember feeling hollow and cold. There are two ways to be a man: to act and live with the consequence, or to sit and always wonder what you might have done. I had acted, and the cost followed like a shadow. The police asked questions. They asked about the gun, about the fight, about who I was. I told them the truth as I had lived it. I had pulled the trigger in defense of my child. They put marks in forms and took pictures, and later the legal process moved forward with the kind of bureaucratic weight that wants to turn everything into paperwork. No one asked whether a bird laughed on the telephone line. No one recorded the nights of sleepless prayer or the amulet stiff against my chest. My wife was shaken but alive. The curandero came and worked with us again. He did not promise that all scars would vanish. He put his hands to her temples and talked to her in a voice that was low and steady. He lit a small bundle and the smoke curled. She slept after his touch, the way someone sleeps after they've been shepherded through a storm. After the wound healed and the police finished their notes, months unrolled like a wounded calendar. People around us whispered about what had happened. Some said I had done the right thing. Others thought I was violent. I did not feel the difference. I had lived through the sharpest fear I've ever known. I had seen my son taken from me, and I had fought to bring him back. One morning, after the leaves had hardened into the dry season, I felt something push at the bottom of my chest that I did not expect: the need to give back the amulet. I had kept it all this time, the small silver chain still warm with the memory of her fingers. It had become almost a presence on its own, the thing I carried against my rib cage whenever I left the house. I wanted to return it because I felt tied to a thread I could not quite cut. Guilt, gratitude, 1,000 small obligations bundled like twine. The amulet had been a gift and a question all at once. Don Marin told me how to find the caravan where she had been that first night. He said it would be on the outskirts. These people moved slow and kept their own places. I went in the late afternoon with José in my arms, the sun rubbing the dust into the road. My hands shook when I walked up to the circle of tents. Smoke curled from a pot, and children ran with a ball. A woman with a shawl looked up at me and didn't speak for a while. Her face looked like a map of old journeys. I told her I had come to return the chain. I wanted to say thank you and close the circle. It felt honest to give back what had been given. She took the amulet and held it like it was a part of her body. When she put it in her pocket, she smiled in a way that made her look younger and older at the same time. "She blessed you," the woman said, and she used Sarah's name like saying it could still wake the air. She did what she came to do. I asked then, because I had the bravado of a man who had been close to losing everything and found courage in it. I asked where Sarah herself might be. The woman looked at me and the smile slipped. Her voice went small. "Sarah is dead," she said. "Sarah has been dead for years." I stood there like the world had shifted under my feet. "What do you mean?" I asked. The woman explained what she knew. Some stories that had been told around fires, a memory of a fever, a final journey, and the words stacked in my head like bricks. The thing that had given me the amulet, the thing that had warned me and saved me in its strange way, had not lived in the world I saw every day. She had been gone for years. I thought of that first rainy night, the way she had pressed the amulet into my hand, the way she had said my life would be marked. I thought of the bird with its laugh, the old woman who had taken my son, and the wound in the chest that letting go of fear leaves you with. I thought about how small acts, giving a charm, walking into an alley, holding a newborn, become the moments that decide our lives. I felt a gratitude that was sharp and warm. In the months and years after, life returned to a kind of slow normal. The baby grew in a way that makes a man think the world is a better place for being able to feed a child and watch him sleep. My wife recovered fully, thanks in part to the curandero's steady hands, and in part to time and the small fingers of fate that let things mend. We moved the crib back to its original place. The amulet stayed in the caravan. I visited sometimes, always leaving with a small nod and a sense that the world had lines I could not see. There are things I will never know. Was Sarah a ghost? A woman who slipped between the spaces of life and death to do what she could? Was the old woman a true witch or a human with a hatred that turned monstrous in the night? I cannot answer those absolute questions. What I can tell you is what I felt. The cold of the metal against my chest, the soft weight of my son's body when I found him, the sound of a bird that laughed like a human and made me taste iron in my mouth. I can tell you how fear pressed on my rib cage like a hand, and how, in the end, gratitude loosened that grip. When terror struck, when that woman in the rain set a chain into my palm and told me my life would be tested, I thought I had a choice between ignoring it and letting it be forgotten. I chose instead to hold on to the small things that rooted me. Don Marin's neighborliness, the curandero's quiet work, the priest's blessing, my wife's steadiness, and the stubbornness of a man who would not let another take the child he had sworn to protect. That stubbornness cost me. It also saved me in a way I do not have words for. I tell you this not to teach anyone how to act in horror. There are no manuals for that. But to tell you what fear does to a family and how small human acts of help and kindness can shape the ending. People prayed for us. People judged us. People came with hands ready to bandage or to point. It all folded together into a life that left scar tissue, but also left room for laughter and for the ordinary joys of bread on a table and a child learning to say his father's name. Some nights I still wake at 3 in the morning, and the house is quiet, and the world outside has the same composition it always has. I look at the empty space on the dashboard where my rosary used to be, and I think of the woman who hummed in the rain, and of Sarah, who is said to have been dead for years. I think of how ordinary people, drivers, mothers, neighbors, a healer, became the agents of protection and healing in a story that could have become uglier if they had not chosen to act. If you ever find yourself skeptical of stories like this, remember that none of us choose the nights when our world opens and shows us its raw side. We simply live out what we are given. I am a taxi driver. I drove number 824 for years. I was a man who collected fares and collected stories from the road. That night, a woman in the rain entered my car and left me with more than a charm. She left me with a warning that taught me how to fight when it mattered most. Now, when I tell it, I tend to end with the same small ritual. I lay my hands on the amulet first, and then I say thank you. Thank you to whoever Sarah was, to the life that gave us a stranger's protection, to the people who helped save my son, and to whatever force kept a small hand from being taken forever. I do not know the nature of miracles. I only know the shape of gratitude, and that, sometimes, an act as small as pressing a chain into a stranger's palm is the difference between losing everything and keeping what you love. Share this story if it gave you chills, and if you have your own experience like mine, send it our way. Subscribe for more true accounts, stories that begin on the road and end with a lesson we all can learn. Protect what you love, listen to those who warn you, and never assume terror comes alone.